"I don't believe you, lady." Specialist Jared Mueller leaned out of the guard shack with the credential pinched between two fingers, holding it up to the thin morning light, as if the sun might confess something the woman would not. He turned it over. He turned it back. He made a small, theatrical face for the benefit of his partner and the line of idling cars behind her. "Nobody who actually works behind that gate walks up on foot in a windbreaker," he said. "This card is a fake. Turn around." The woman did not step back, and she did not raise her voice. She stood at the barrier of the compound, the way a stone stands in a river, letting everything move around her, taking no notice of the current. She was perhaps 33, plainly dressed, a blue windbreaker zipped halfway, her hands loose at her sides. There was nothing about her that asked to be looked at. There was nothing about her that asked for anything at all. If you had passed her on a sidewalk, you would have forgotten her before the next block. That was not an accident. It had taken her a long time, and a great deal of training, and one very bad night, to learn how to be a person no one remembers, to move through the world at the exact volume of the furniture, to let the eye slide off her and land on something louder. She had made a career out of being underestimated, and she had learned to wear the underestimation like a coat. It kept her warm. It kept other people wrong about her, which was frequently the entire objective. So when the young specialist decided in 3 seconds that she was nobody, he was not making a mistake so much as walking straight into the design of her. The only difference this morning was that she had somewhere to be, and no time to let him enjoy being wrong for as long as he wanted to. The gate itself was built to say no. It sat at the edge of a large army installation, at the mouth of a restricted compound that had no sign worth reading, and a fence line that ran off in both directions until it disappeared into the tree break. Jersey barriers narrowed the approach to a single lane. A striped arm hung across the road. A reader pedestal stood at the driver's window height, its little screen dark, waiting for a card it had not yet been given. Beyond the fence, low buildings sat in the flat gray light with the particular stillness of places where the work is quiet on purpose. Inside the shack, Staff Sergeant Roy Delgado watched the monitors and said nothing yet. He was 41, thick through the shoulders, with the settled patience of a man who had stood a lot of gates and learned that most trouble announces itself early if you are willing to be quiet enough to hear it. He had been half listening. Now he was listening all the way. The woman held the credential out again, unhurried, offering it a second time the way you would hand something back to a person who had dropped it without noticing. "Run it through the pedestal, specialist," she said. "The reader will tell you what I can't." Mueller laughed. He was young, and he was quick, and he had decided, somewhere in the first 3 seconds, what kind of morning this was going to be. A woman on foot. No rank, no escort, no vehicle idling with a placard on the dash. In his experience, the people who belonged behind that fence arrived in a certain way, and she had arrived in none of them. "The reader's for real personnel," he said, loud enough for the cars. "You want me to scan a card any print shop could have made and just wave you through a restricted compound? That's not how this works." Her breathing did not change. Her eyes did not move to the cars or to the phone that had come up in the second vehicle where a young private had begun, quietly, to film. She kept her attention on Mueller and on the little dark screen of the reader, and there was in her stillness something that Delgado did not yet have a word for, but was already beginning to distrust, because he had stood this gate before, on mornings that never made it into any log, for men and women who arrived with no fanfare and left with less, whose names he had been told to forget the moment they cleared the fence. And every one of them had carried themselves like this, not stiff, not proud, just settled. Like people who had already been through the worst version of every room and had stopped being impressed by any of them. Mueller thumbed his radio and keyed it up with a grin, announcing a possible fraudulent access attempt at the gate, requesting guidance, playing the whole thing to the cheap seats. And the woman, for the first time, closed her eyes. Just for one breath. The way a person does before a thing they have survived before. A bracing, a settling of the shoulders, the small private ritual of someone who knows exactly how long the next few minutes are going to take and has decided to spend them well. Delgado saw it through the shack window. He did not know what it meant. He knew only that it did not belong to a woman who had faked a card, and that the gap between what Muller thought he was looking at and what Delgado was beginning to fear he was looking at had just become very wide. "Sit tight," Muller told her, hooking his thumbs into his belt. "We'll get this sorted." "Yes," she said. "We will." Delgado set down his coffee and reached for the door of the shack, because 30 years of instinct had just told him, all at once, that the loudest person at this gate was the one who understood the least. Behind the fence, the low building sat quiet in the gray light and did not care at all what anyone at the gate believed. The specialist was still performing when Delgado came out of the shack. He came out slowly, the way you approach a thing you do not yet understand, and he stopped a few feet off and looked, not at Muller, but at the credential lying now on the hood of the shack truck where the specialist had tossed it. Delgado had spent a long time around badges. He knew the installation pass by its color and its holograph. He knew the contractor card, the temporary visitor tag, the escort required band. This was none of them. It was plainer than any of them, and that plainness was itself a kind of signature. The woman watched him look. When he raised his eyes to her face, she spoke, quietly, without any triumph in it. "That credential is issued out of the program office," she said, "not the installation pass office. When you scan it and the pedestal locks, that is not a malfunction. That is the system doing exactly what it is built to do." Delgado had heard a lot of people talk their way through his gate over the years. He had heard sob stories and hard luck stories and important person stories. He had never, in all that time, heard anyone describe the failure state of his own reader before the reader had failed. That was not a thing you learned from a manual. You learned it from living inside the machine, from the far side of it, from being the reason a reader in some other country somewhere had gone dark for someone else. Delgado had spent 20 years in the Army, and 8 of them on gates like this one, and he had developed the specific humility of a man who guards doors he is not allowed to walk through. He did not know what was on the other side of this fence. He knew only that the people who belonged there came in 2 kinds: the ones who needed him to believe they were important, and the ones who did not care what he believed at all. The first kind talked. The second kind stood exactly like this. "Say that again," he said. "Scan the card," she said. "The screen will go dark before it decides. It will throw a code, not a color, and it will send a notification you and the specialist are not cleared to see the contents of. That is not the reader breaking. That is the reader working." She had not moved. The sun was climbing, and it had begun to catch the reader's screen at an angle that would wash it out, and she shifted her stance a half step to the left, not to be closer to anything, but to put her own shadow across the pedestal so the screen would read clean. It was a small thing. It was the kind of thing a person does without thinking when they have run these systems 100 times, when the machine is not a mystery to them, but a tool they have used in the dark, with cold hands. Delgado saw it, and the fear in his stomach took on a shape. "Specialist," Delgado said. "Ease off. Check that credential number against the inbound roster. Now." But Muller was not listening to his staff sergeant. He had an audience, and he had a theory, and he had reached the part of the morning where being right had become more important than being careful. "The roster's for real personnel," he said, and he grinned at the phone. "Come on, Sergeant. On foot? In a windbreaker?" You believe this?" Delgado did not answer him. He was looking at the woman's hands. They were still loose. They had stayed loose through all of it. Through the mockery, through the laughter from the cars, through the specialist tossing her credential onto a truck hood like a losing ticket. There was no tremor in them, no clench, none of the small betrayals that fear leaves in the fingers. She stood with the flat, economical stillness of someone conserving everything, spending nothing, and she gave Delgado exactly one look. It was not a plea. He had seen 1,000 pleas, and this was not one. It was closer to an acknowledgement, a small nod between two people who both understood what was coming, one of them dreading it, and one of them merely waiting for it. She was telling him, without a word, that she knew he had figured it out, and that she was sorry he was about to have a very bad morning too. Then she went still again, and the stillness was somehow worse than any protest could have been. Muller laughed and said something else to the cars, some joke about documentaries and clearance, and Delgado's jaw tightened, because he had just understood the true shape of the thing. He was the only person at this gate who knew what was standing in front of them. The specialist didn't know. The cars didn't know. The private with the phone didn't know. And the woman in the windbreaker knew exactly, and had chosen to let the machine explain it, rather than say it herself. He turned back toward the shack to get the credential, and the morning tipped 1 degree further toward the thing it was going to become. Muller's partner came out to join the fun. He was younger even than Muller, and he arrived at the barrier with the loose swagger of a man showing up to a party he'd heard was good. The two of them fell into it together the way young men do, feeding each other, each joke a little louder than the last. Both of them half turned toward the traffic line, and the phone, as though the woman were less a person than a bit they were performing. "Windbreaker lady," the partner said, delighted. "You watch a documentary? Read a couple articles? Figure you've got clearance now?" "Careful," Muller said, mock serious. "She's very important, very classified. Can't tell us who she is." He spread his hands. "Because there's nobody to tell." Some of the drivers laughed. Not all of them. A sergeant first class 2 cars back had stopped smiling a while ago and was looking at the woman's stillness with a small crease forming between his brows. The way a man looks at a card trick when he has just begun to suspect it is not a trick. Another soldier looked deliberately down at his own steering wheel, wanting no part of whatever this was. The private kept filming, and the woman kept standing, and the longer she stood without reacting, the more her calm began to feel less like weakness and more like weather, like something large and slow that the 2 young men were shouting into without any idea it was there. "You want me to believe you belong behind that fence," Muller said, warming to it. "Lady, I have got master sergeants, 20-year soldiers, who cannot get through that reader on the first try." "Then you should already know it does not lie," she said. It was the first time she had answered the crowd instead of the man, and it landed differently. The partner's grin flickered. Muller covered the flicker with more volume. "The trouble with an audience is that it makes a man spend courage he has not earned." Muller was not, on an ordinary day, a cruel person. He was 22, and he had a partner to impress, and a phone he could feel on him like heat, and every laugh from the traffic line was a small loan against a debt he did not know he was taking on. Each joke required a bigger joke to follow it. Each step toward the woman made the step back look more like losing. He had built himself a little staircase out of other people's laughter and climbed it without once looking down, and now he was standing at the top of it, with nowhere left to go but further out, and a woman at the bottom who had not moved at all. "All right," he said, and the humor went out of his voice, and something harder came in behind it. "Step out of the lane, credential on the hood. You're not a visitor anymore. You're a detainee, and detainees don't stand in my lane." She stepped out of the lane. She set the credential on the hood exactly where he pointed. She kept her hands visible the entire time, moving with a precision that was not nervous and not defiant, but simply correct. Every motion the motion a person makes when they have been detained by people far more dangerous than a gate guard and have learned that the way through is to give the nervous man in front of you absolutely nothing to misread. Delgado, off to the side now, had his radio to his ear. He had raised the compound's access desk and was asking, quietly, turned away from Muller, who was inbound this morning, and whether anyone was expected on foot. The line clicked. A voice asked him to hold. He held, and watched Muller reach toward the pouch on his belt where the flex cuffs were, and felt the morning go over the edge. If you have ever watched someone loud decide that quiet means weak, that stillness is surrender, that a person who does not shout must have nothing to say, then stay with this one and subscribe to the Veteran Vault. What this gate is about to learn is a lesson worth being in the room for. Muller's fingers found the flex cuffs, and he pulled them free. It stopped being a joke the moment the cuffs came off his belt. "Turn around," Muller said. "Hands behind your back." She was already turning. That was the thing Delgado would come back to later, over and over. That the specialist's order and the woman's motion arrived at the same instant. That she had begun setting her wrists together at the small of her back before the words were fully out of his mouth. He told her to put her hands behind her back, and her hands were already there. He told her to put her hands behind her back. Her hands were already there. She had done this before, in places with no cameras and no traffic line and no partner cracking jokes. And she had learned in those places that the fastest way through a bad few minutes is stillness. That you give the frightened man holding the restraint nothing to fight, because a man who is not fighting anything cannot escalate. She offered her wrists the way you offer a tool to someone who has asked for it. Muller cinched the flex cuff and pulled it tight, and she did not make a sound. Attempted access to a restricted area with fraudulent credentials, he announced. For the phone, for the cars, for himself. That's how this works. "No," she said. Her voice was level, almost gentle, and it carried further than his had. "It is not." And then, as the plastic bit into her wrists, she began, calmly, without heat, the way a person reads a checklist, to tell him precisely which regulation he was standing on the wrong side of. "You are required to notify the program duty officer before you restrain a holder of that credential type," she said. "There is a notification chain. You have not triggered it. There is an office you are required to call before you detain anyone carrying that badge, and you have not called it. Write down the time, specialist. Write down this exact minute. You are going to need it, and you are going to need it to be accurate." She was not threatening him. That was the strange part, the part the private's phone caught, and the part people would remark on later when the video was watched in rooms it was never meant to reach, that there was no anger in her voice at all. She recited the regulation the way a doctor names a bone, without malice, as a simple description of the thing that was broken. It made it worse for Muller, not better. A furious detainee he could have dismissed. A calm one who knew the rules better than he did, who was quietly building the case against him while he tightened the cuff, was a kind of person his training had never prepared him to meet. He had been taught how to control a resisting body. No one had taught him what to do with a woman who surrendered her wrists and took his career apart in complete sentences while she did it. The gate had gone quiet around her voice. The laughter had died somewhere in the last 30 seconds, and no one had noticed it go. The partner had stopped grinning. The private with the phone had lowered it a few inches, some instinct telling him that this had crossed out of the funny thing he thought he was recording and into something he did not want his hands anywhere near. The sergeant first class 2 cars back had opened his door and was standing half out of his vehicle, not intervening, just watching, the way you stand when you sense you may shortly be a witness. "You can recite regs all you want," Muller said, but the certainty had thinned in his voice. "Doesn't change what I'm looking at." "It will," she said. Delgado, 10 feet away, was still on hold, and then he was not. The access desk came back on the line. He gave them the credential number off the card on the hood, read the long string of it out low and careful, and there was a pause on the other end. Not the pause of a person looking something up. The pause of a person who has found something and doesn't want to say the next part on an open line. The voice told him to hold the gate, touch nothing, move no one. Someone was coming down. Delgado lowered the radio from his ear very slowly. He looked at the woman zip-cuffed against the barrier, standing there patient and unbothered as a person waiting for a bus, and he said, mostly to himself, in the flat voice of a man watching a small thing become a very large thing. "Oh no." Delgado crossed to the truck and picked the credential up off the hood. He did it deliberately, the way you handle something you have just realized might be live. Muller started to say something, that the detainee's property stayed on the hood, that there was a process, and Delgado turned on him with a look that shut his mouth mid-sentence. "Son," Delgado said, and his voice had gone very quiet, which was worse than if he had shouted, "You have no idea who you just put a zip tie on. Stand right there. Do not say another word." He walked the credential to the reader pedestal. The woman watched him go, and for the first time, something in her face softened. Not relief exactly, but a kind of tired gratitude. The look of a person who has been waiting a long while for one competent man to arrive and has finally seen him. Delgado scanned the card. The screen did not flash green. It did not flash red. It went dark, completely dark, the way she had said it would, and held there for a second, and then another, long enough that Muller's partner leaned in to see what was wrong with it. Then it threw a code. Not a word anyone at the gate could read as a word, a compartment string, a run of letters, and a single term that Delgado had seen exactly twice in his career and had been told, both times, to forget he had seen. Under it, a line of smaller text and a soft chime. Not the ordinary access chime, not the reject buzz, but a tone Muller had never heard the machine make in 8 months of standing this gate. Somewhere behind the fence, in a room with no windows, a notification arrived on a screen that mattered. The reader had 2 answers for most people who came to that gate: yes or no, green or red. For her, it had a 3rd answer, and the 3rd answer was not for the guards to read. The 3rd answer was a phone call to a room that did not officially exist, telling the people inside it that one of their own was standing at the barrier in flexible cuffs. Delgado had scanned 10,000 cards at that pedestal. He knew its moods the way you know an old truck, the half-second hitch before it cleared a contractor, the flat immediate red of an expired badge, the double beep it gave when the network was slow. He had never heard the tone it made now. It was softer than the others, almost polite, and somehow, that was the most frightening thing about it, because it was the sound of a machine that had stopped talking to the guard and started talking to someone else entirely. He stood there with the card in his hand and understood that he had just been demoted in an instant from the man who decided who passed to a man standing near a door while something far above his pay grade decided everything for him. Delgado turned around. All the color had gone out of his voice. "Cut the cuffs," he said to Muller. "Right now. Cut them." Muller did not move. He was staring at the dark screen, at the code he could not read, at his staff sergeant's face, and none of the 3 were giving him anything he understood. "Sergeant, if she's some kind of security risk, we can't just—" "She is not the security risk at this gate," Delgado said. "You are. Cut the cuffs. That is a lawful order, and you have about 10 seconds to make it the best decision you make today." The traffic line had gone silent, not the awkward silence of before. A held, engine idling, everyone can feel it silence, the kind that travels down a row of cars without a word being spoken, one driver reading it off the next, until the whole line understood that the gate had changed. The sergeant first class stood all the way out of his vehicle now. The private had put the phone down entirely. Behind the fence, a vehicle pulled out from between two of the low buildings, a plain sedan, government plates, and turned toward the gate, unhurried and certain, the way a car moves when the person in it already knows everything they are about to walk into. What the boy in the pressed uniform did not know is what the next 3 minutes were about to teach him. Subscribe so you do not miss it, because the woman he cuffed at the gate was about to become the most important person on the entire installation, and she had been that person the whole time. To understand what the reader had found, you have to leave the gate. You have to go back 8 years, and most of the way around the world, to a night that 9 people knew about. There were 9 people in the world who knew the operation was happening. By dawn, there would be 8. It was 2018, and Elise Kerrigan was 25 years old, and she was a lieutenant then, though the word lieutenant does not describe what she was doing that night. She was on the wrong side of a border that officially she had never crossed, moving to recover a source who had been burned, a man whose usefulness had ended the moment his name appeared on the wrong list, and whose life had a clock on it, now measured in hours. The window to bring him out was 90 minutes wide. The distance from the covered ground to the vehicles was 800 meters of open dark. The team was small, because small was the only thing that could move quietly enough to matter. It went the way these things go when they go wrong, which is to say, all at once and near the end. They had the source. They were moving him through the last stretch toward the vehicles when the night came apart. Muzzle flash from a rooftop that should have been empty. Then more, the whole far side of the approach lighting up, and the team pinned at the vehicles with 800 meters of nothing between them and the man they had come to save. Sergeant First Class Micah Lund took the near corner. He did it without being told, which was the kind of soldier he was. He put himself at the one angle that covered the gap the source had to cross, and he held it, alone, so that Kerrigan could move the man through. And he called out to her over the noise, once, the last words she would ever hear him say, and they were not a goodbye. They were an order. "Go. I have got the corner. Do not you dare come back for me." She had known him for 3 years. She knew that he had a daughter who was learning to swim, and that he took his coffee with too much sugar and was quietly ashamed of it, and that he had re-enlisted twice for reasons he could never quite explain, except that this was the work, and these were the people, and where else would he go? She knew that he had held corners before, in other countries, on other nights, and had always come back from them, grinning, complaining, alive. None of that knowledge did her any good. Knowledge never does in the moment. It only arrives afterward, in the years, when there is nothing to be done with it but carry it. That is the true weight the clearance was built to protect, not a secret, not a method, but a man, and the exact price of a single crossing on a single night. She moved the source through the gap. She reached the vehicle, and when she turned to cover Lund's withdrawal, the near corner had gone quiet, and the quiet told her everything the dark would not. There was no time to go back. There is never, in the true version of these stories, any time to go back. That is the part the movies get wrong, and the part the survivors never forget. She carried his last order out of that country instead of his body, because carrying the order out was the only way to make the corner mean something, and she has carried it every day since. The operation is buried under a compartment now, a wall of clearance built around that night, so that the source who lived and the network that held and the names of everyone who moved in the dark would stay in the dark, where they were safe. The Silver Star was awarded in a room with the blinds drawn and read into a record almost no one can open. And her name, inside the small community of people cleared to know any of it, stopped being Kerrigan and became a single word, a word chosen because it meant a line that holds a great weight without ever being seen to strain. They called her Halyard. The clearance on the credential at the gate, the third answer the reader gave, the code the specialist could not read, was the wall around that night. It was Micah Lund's corner, turned into a level of access, and the boy in the pressed uniform had just put a plastic cuff on the wrists that carried Lund's last order 800 meters through the dark and all the way home. Back at the gate, in the last seconds before the sedan reached the barrier, none of them knew any of it. They only knew the machine had made a sound they had never heard. But the machine knew. The machine had been built, in part, to protect exactly this, and it had just recognized the person it was built around. Muller, cornered, humiliated, did the worst thing a cornered man can do. He doubled down. "She gets processed by the book," he said, and his voice cracked upward on the last word. "Sergeant, I don't care what the reader did. We can't just release a detained. She's in cuffs. There's a procedure. She goes to the bench and she gets processed." And he reached out and took the woman by the arm to march her to the detention bench beside the shack. She let him. That was the part he would think about for the rest of his life. Not the reader. Not the colonel who was 30 seconds away. This. That a woman he could not have moved 1 inch on her own strength had turned and walked where he pointed, and that it happened only because she allowed it to happen. He had his hand on her arm, and he was steering her, and somewhere underneath the fear, a small, ugly part of him felt back in control. And none of it was real. Her balance never broke. His did. Twice, on the uneven ground. She walked at exactly the pace he pushed, and no faster. And he understood, in a way he could not have put into words, that he was holding something the way a child holds a lion by the mane and calls it obedience. He should have felt it sooner. Everything in the way she moved was information, if he had been the kind of man who could read it. The way her feet found the uneven ground without her eyes leaving him. The way her weight stayed centered no matter how he pushed. The small mechanical economy of a body that had been trained until training became instinct, and instinct became rest. There are people who are dangerous because they are large and loud. And there are people who are dangerous the way deep water is dangerous, quietly, by being far more than they appear. And the only warning you ever get is the moment just before you understand. You are already in over your head. Muller got his warning at the bench, with his hand on her arm, and by then, it was the last useful thing he would learn all morning. "You can walk me to that bench, specialist," she said, without heat, without even turning her head. It will not change what the reader already said. He got her to the bench. He did not make her sit. Some instinct, arriving far too late, told him not to push the woman down onto a bench, and he stood there with his hand still on her arm and no idea what to do with the moment he had made. The sedan reached the barrier and stopped. Both front doors opened. The driver was a young captain who came around the front of the car fast and then stopped himself, visibly, the way you stop yourself from running in a place where running would say too much. And from the passenger side, unhurried, buttoning a single button of his jacket as he stood, came a full colonel, silver eagles bright on his patrol cap, a man of about 50, with a flat, unreadable command face. And he did not look at the captain, and he did not look at Delgado, and he did not look at the specialist standing frozen with his hand on a detainee's arm. He looked at the woman in the flex cuffs, and his stomach, Muller's stomach, dropped through the ground before a single word was spoken, because he had been in the army long enough to know that colonels do not walk out to gates, and they do not look at detainees like that, and the only reason in the world for both of those things to be happening at once was the one reason he could not bear to finish thinking. The colonel crossed the last few feet of the gate, stopped in front of the cuffed woman, and came to attention. Colonel Adrian Foss did not raise his voice. He did not need to. When a full colonel comes to attention in front of a woman in plastic handcuffs, the volume is already at maximum. "Major Kerrigan," he said, "I apologize for the reception. You should have been walked straight through the moment you reached the barrier. That failure is mine to fix, and I will fix it." The colonel did not look at the specialist. He rendered his courtesy to the woman in the zip tie, cleanly and completely, and that was the moment every laugh at the gate died at once, not one at a time, but all together, as though a single switch had been thrown. The partner's face went white. The captain by the car had come to attention as well. Down the traffic line, doors were opening, soldiers stepping out, some instinct older than any order pulling them upright. "Major," Muller said, and it came out of him as barely a sound. His hand was still on her arm. He took it off as though the fabric had gone hot. Foss turned then and let the specialist see his face and spoke, not only to him, but to the whole gate, in the clear carrying voice of a man putting something on the record. "For those of you who need to hear it plainly," he said, "this is the officer reporting in this morning to take over the program behind that fence. She walked to your gate on foot because she does not announce herself. That is the entire point of her, and it is a thing most of you will never be senior enough to understand. In another room, she has another name, and it is a name that a very small number of people are permitted to say. You are not cleared for it. What you are cleared to do is cut those cuffs and remember this morning for the rest of your careers." Delgado already had the tool out. He stepped in and cut the flex cuff in one motion, and it fell away. And the woman brought her hands around in front of her and rubbed each wrist once, briefly, the way you rub feeling back into a hand that has been asleep. That was the whole of her reaction. No outrage, no triumph. One pass of the thumb over each wrist, and then her hands were still again. "Staff Sergeant," Foss said to Delgado, "for the record, what did the reader return?" "A compartment code and a lock, sir," Delgado said, standing very straight. "Third tier return, above my read-on, above the specialists. The system sent the notification on its own. She told me it would, sir, word for word, before I scanned it. She would know," Foss said. "She helped write how that reader decides." The face cycle happened on Muller in the space of those two sentences, and Delgado watched it go by like weather crossing a field. First the confusion, the last stubborn hope that this was some misunderstanding that would still, somehow, break his way. Then the disbelief as the pieces refused to arrange themselves into anything survivable. Then the recognition, the true understanding arriving all at once, that the woman on foot in the windbreaker was the most important person on the installation, that she had told him exactly what would happen, and he had cuffed her for it, that every second of the last 20 minutes had been recorded on a private's phone. And then the horror, clean, total, the specific horror of a young man who has just watched his own career walk out to a gate and look at him with mild, patient eyes. The gate came to attention, not by command. The MPs, the drivers, the sergeant first class, the private who had filmed it all, one after another, they came upright and still, the whole ragged line of the morning pulling itself into a shape of respect that no one had ordered, and everyone suddenly needed to make. There is a thing that happens to a group of soldiers when they are shown all at once that they have been standing in the presence of something they failed to recognize. It is not quite shame, and it is not quite awe. It is the two of them braided together, and it straightens the spine faster than any command. Every person at that gate was running the same tape backward in their heads. The laughter, the jokes about documentaries, the phone, the cuffs, and measuring it against the sight of a full colonel standing at attention in front of the woman they had let it happen to. The measuring did not go well for any of them. That was the point of standing to attention now. It was the only apology a body could make quickly enough to matter. And so they made it, all of them, without a word. In the middle of that silence, the woman finally spoke. Not to the colonel. She turned her head, unhurried, and looked at the boy who had cuffed her, and asked him one thing, evenly, with no edge on it at all. "What is your name, specialist?" The consequences arrived in a plain truck 2 minutes behind the colonel. A Sergeant First Class Muller had never wanted to meet on a day like this. The platoon sergeant came through the gate with the provost marshal's representative, and the machinery of accountability began to turn with the awful smoothness of a thing that has done this many times before. Muller was relieved at the gate. His weapon was taken. He was walked to the truck, not roughly, but completely. The way a man is removed from a post he can no longer be trusted to stand. The charge would not be the cuffing itself in the end. It would be the notification he never made, the duty officer he never called, the chain he never triggered, the exact minute the major had told him to write down. She had told him he would need it, and he needed it. The by-the-book guard, undone entirely by the book he had been so sure he was holding. There is a particular justice in that, and everyone at the gate felt it, and no one enjoyed it as much as they might have expected to. It is a common thing to want to watch a bully get what is coming to him, and a rarer thing to be in the room when it actually happens, and find that it tastes of nothing. The soldiers at the gate had wanted 20 minutes earlier for someone to put the loud young specialist in his place. Now that it was being done, thoroughly, permanently, in front of everyone, they mostly wished they could look somewhere else. He was so young, he had been so sure, and the distance between how large he had felt at the top of his little staircase of laughter and how small he looked. Being walked to the truck was a distance every one of them recognized from somewhere in their own lives and did not enjoy being reminded of. It was the major who stopped it from going all the way to the bottom. She caught the provost's representative before the paperwork became a canyon, and she spoke to him quietly, off to the side, in the plain, even voice she had used for everything that morning. He did the job the way he was taught to do it, she said. Just badly. He was aggressive when he should have been careful, and he performed when he should have been quiet. And both of those are things a good sergeant can train out of a young soldier in a year. Correct him. Teach him better. Do not end him over it. She paused. I have buried people who deserved more grace than he showed me and got less. I am not interested in adding him to a list. Write him up for the notification failure. Leave the rest of his life alone. The provost's man wrote it down. What she asked for, she generally got, and everyone in earshot had just watched why. Honor the ones who carry it in silence, the people who walk to the gate on foot, who let the machine speak for them, who ask for mercy for the person who wronged them because they have seen the real cost of the alternative. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault and let this story find the people who need it. 3 days later, Muller was waiting at the barrier when she walked in. He was not on the gate anymore. He had been moved to other duties while the paperwork ran its course, but he had asked permission to be there at that hour, and someone had granted it, and he stood off to the side of the lane in a clean uniform with his cap in his hands when the woman in the blue windbreaker came up the road on foot, the same as before. She stopped in front of him. She waited. "Ma'am," he said. "Major, I don't have an excuse. I decided what you were in the first 3 seconds, and then I spent 20 minutes making the facts fit it. I put you in cuffs because you were calm, and I read calm as guilt. I was wrong in every way a person can be wrong, and I'm sorry. That's all. I'm sorry. She looked at him for a moment, really looked, the way she had not bothered to at the gate, when looking would have cost her something. Then she nodded. Once. That was a good apology, she said. No excuses in it. Hold on to that. It is rarer than you think. She glanced toward the reader pedestal, and something almost like warmth moved across her face. The reader will never lie to you, specialist. Not once in your whole career. Every person who comes to that gate, it will tell you the truth about. If you let it speak before you decide, you already know. That is the entire job. Let the machine talk first. Then, you will never have to make a morning like this one again. She stepped past him and clipped her credential to her jacket and walked to the pedestal. And this time, the reader took a full second in the dark and then led her through the way it had always been going to. The striped arm lifted. She walked into the compound she had been sent to lead, on foot, unannounced, exactly as she had come. It would be a long time before Jared Muller told the story to anyone, and when he finally did, years later, to a young soldier of his own who had just decided in 3 seconds that he knew exactly who he was looking at, he would not tell it as the morning he was humiliated at a gate. He would tell it as the morning he learned the most useful thing he ever knew about the Army and about people. That the ones who carry the most are almost never the ones who say so. That quiet is not the same as small, and that a machine built by careful people will tell you the truth about a stranger every single time, if only you can find the discipline to let it speak before your certainty does. He had paid a high price for the lesson. He spent the rest of his career making sure it was not wasted. At the shack, Staff Sergeant Delgado watched her go with his coffee cooling in his hand, and the quiet, settled look of a man who had known before anyone, who had read it off her stillness and her loose hands and the way she moved her own shadow to keep the sun off a screen. He had stood a lot of gates. He had learned to be quiet enough to hear the trouble coming, and the best of it, he thought, the very best, was that the trouble had never once been her. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.